Hi, my name's Maria. I'm an artist, composer, and professor at Berklee College of Music. In this video, I'm going to share some of my early mistakes and a couple of the questions I think all aspiring creative entrepreneurs should be asking themselves to find their own artistic voice. Enjoy!
How did you end up in Western classical composition for percussion?
So I studied percussion performance and literature in both undergrad and master's. And so I was being primed to be a performer, whether that's in orchestras or chamber ensembles or as a soloist. And what's interesting though is all during that time, I was continuously writing music. And it was very natural as someone who also played in drums and jazz and playing in a pop punk band in high school. And it's like you just make music. Although I never really stamped myself as a composer, it was always kind of just what you do. And so I had great mentors and great teachers in those schools that had us write compositions. I took composition classes. And then after school, I ended up moving and studying in northern Sweden, where I really actually wanted to dive into my voice as a composer, a creator, and improviser. And I took that time to study, I took that time to listen, and I took that time to explore a lot of that voice. It became very clear to me that articulating music through my own voice was going to be really important.
When you were in your early 20s, did you feel like you had a clearly defined artistic voice? Or did you feel like you were desperately flailing about trying to figure out what the heck is going on?
Let's just totally be real. I still feel like I'm developing my artistic voice, 100%. So me in my early mid-20s, the flailing was ferociously flailing. It was yeah, I'll move to Sweden. Yeah, okay, cool. This is totally strategic. And I totally want to talk about this in 15 years and say how this was very, oh, look at me being curious. Okay. Let's just say I was so proud of the education and the skill set I had, but its application to a real career and its application to here's my voice and here's the vision was so not there. But what was there were questions, right? So while we're flailing, that is what you should be doing in your early 20s. If you are not flailing in your 20s, just start flopping about, because that is what that time of our life is for. So just as you flop and flail, just make sure you're asking yourself questions.
Can you walk me through one of those early flailings?
Okay, I want to tell you a little story. In the entrepreneurial life, we do a lot. If you're making a thing, you're directing it, you're designing it, you're doing the finances, meeting people at the airport, you're the community orienter, and you're also trying to make the music and compose. And flailing early mid-20s me did not know how to delegate, did not know the weight of all of these roles. We invited high schoolers, we invited another college of people to come from Alaska, working with a student marketing team. We were writing music and performing music in all of the evening concerts. We were doing educational. It was it was everything. All of us were doing everything. There was so much to do and it was so overwhelming. I'm introducing the concert, and then I go and I sit in the audience and another piece plays and I fell asleep. Fell asleep and was so jostled when everyone started to applaud for that first piece. I mean, if you've ever fallen asleep during a class or something, you know the feeling when you wake up, you're oh no, something happened. And then I had to get on stage and perform a piece of music that I had written. Now I know I cannot immediately play my own music after falling asleep and waking up abruptly, because I don't know what I played. It was not even remotely associated with what I had written on the paper. And I just remember getting through it somehow and looking back at my collaborators and them just being oh, and I just okay, we did it, and taking a bow and just being note to self, don't direct and perform and compose and do all the things, because it was just so terrifying. Oh my gosh. But I lived and I'm here. And I still have a career, so that's nice.
What are the questions that you think aspiring artists and creative entrepreneurs should be asking themselves?
What about your lived experience do you want to share? I think it's hard to understand that your individual lived experience is really special. You're in it, right? And I think that I didn't pay attention to some of that when I was younger. Asking questions about who you're aligning yourself with, where is your music being presented, where is your art being presented. I think a creative life, an entrepreneurial life, a life that is being built in real time is about asking the questions. And sometimes you find the answer and sometimes you just find another question.
What role would you say the communities that you've lived in have shaped and transformed your own voice?
Listening to a community that was so far from the community that I grew up with, well, it challenged me, to be honest. It allowed me to say, hey, okay, like, here's what I grew up understanding as the plan, a plan. But here's another community that kind of has a different plan, has a different rubric for life, has different ideas and different ways to socialize. That type of listening is so powerful because we can understand that there are many right ways to do things. That was like a life lesson, but also artistically, like, okay, here's how all of my teachers and mentors and people I admire do things. Now, you know, being immersed in a new space, you understand that there is actually no right. There's just the way for that person. So compositionally and artistically, I'm saying, oh, I can do things my way that are influenced by all of these things in people and communities, but still at the end of the day, I can own them and I can say, I do it a little different and that's okay.
After Sweden, what was next for you?
Yeah. So I spent 3 years in Sweden, kind of as my home base, and it was beautiful. I toured with the Baltic Sea Philharmonic. I worked with Charles Martin and Jacob Rebington, and we created a percussion trio. We did educational tours. We went to Australia. It was a really fulfilling, free, and creative space. At that time, I was in my mid-20s. I was also like starting to transition to the next stage of my life, which was yearning for deeper roots, to be a little closer to family, yearning to kind of have a little more stability than living a kind of month-to-month artistic lifestyle. I wanted to move to a large city. I wanted to possibly move back to the United States. I wasn't quite sure. And essentially, I just started to search for opportunities. And one really stood out to me, which was a position at New England Conservatory as the manager of their entrepreneurial musicianship department. What was interesting is to that point, never ever called myself an entrepreneur. I was just like not a word that was within my education or like a word I labeled myself as. But as I looked through the job description, it was like someone who can like build projects, fundraise for projects, implement projects, be creative, think strategically. I was like, oh wait, I do all those things. That's cool. And then I would get to like help young people do those things. That's pretty cool. I would love to do that. I applied for the position and was fortunate enough to get the job. And I never imagined myself in Boston even.
At this point in time, when you took on that role, did you feel like you had a clearly defined artistic voice?
Clearly defined anything for me is like, not so much. Percussion music in general is like a very young and new genre and new kind of way to express music in the classical field. So we kind of are an outlier in everything. A percussion ensemble playing only marimbas, vibraphones, drums, and auxiliary percussion or hand drums, like that is kind of its own thing, is very kind of new. And I like that. Like that gets me excited. I think it's taken a bit of time for me to really feel like this is my voice. This is what I want to say. Here is how I write. Here is what I write for. Here is the genre that I live in. The job at New England Conservatory really gave me some foundation that I could play. And it really gave me the stability to kind of meet people and like do low budget projects and just kind of do stuff. And I think after a few years of that job, I let it go. And I had felt that I had had community built and kind of the network built, and I had done enough projects, and I was starting to really identify what that voice was. And I could kind of shed that stability and kind of live this life of risk. That's really when I dug my heels into saying, like, I love percussion music, marimba, vibraphone, I love rhythm, I love my classical background, but I like to kind of shake it up with using electronics and being extremely influenced by popular music. And I want to do this in the public space. Like, it's very important for me to kind of create projects that are more widely accessible, that are telling stories based on community narratives, whether they're deeply associated with me or I'm learning about a narrative. And then a few years of being on my own, I got really like deep into saying, and I think I need to use technology in really kind of specific and strategic ways, because I want to make music and art and experiences that are reflective of what we're able to do now. So we kind of lean on the heels of the past, which is for me, classical contemporary background, while we're kind of looking to the future using emerging technologies, using electronics, and then we're making them accessible. Those kind of three things combined are really the like ingredients to my artistic voice, but did take quite some time to kind of identify and really bubble to the surface.
When did you start defining yourself as a creative entrepreneur?
language is important, but it's also really challenging in this sense that like you feel like you have to identify with that specific piece of language, that specific like label, right? And I think entrepreneurs like are best go at talking about a creative person that like runs their life over hundreds of years. Artists who take control over their creative output and also make a living from it are entrepreneurs. The definition that I use for an entrepreneur is one who takes full risk in an endeavor. And I think artists do that every day. We make sound when no sound has been there. We like create compositions, we create visualizations, like we create. And then we also hold the impact of that from time, from relationships, financially. And so all of that risk is aligned with our more kind of business-oriented definition of entrepreneur. Once moving to Boston, kind of diving into that role, I was like, oh yeah, we got this. Like it actually was almost, while hard to label oneself, it's also like liberating because you're like, well, an entrepreneur does all of these things. So I've kind of dug my heels in, and I think it's really helped create not paths, because I think that an entrepreneur life isn't a path-oriented life, but it's a problem-solving oriented life.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by a path-oriented life versus a problem-solving oriented life?
Yeah, totally. There are paths in the career space, and as you kind of move through adulthood, we yearn to like, what is the next step? We yearn for that, right? Like as humans, we kind of want to know what's ahead. We're kind of ingrained that there is some sort of stepwise motion. When you choose this life as a creative entrepreneur, it's not so much of here's the next step, I'm going to take it and it's laid out for me and it's already been made, but it's saying here's the problem I'm seeing, or here's the inspiration that I'm seeing. Which way am I going to go with that? Which way am I going to go with that? Because that is going to be very different from the person next to me. And a creative entrepreneur like embraces that and like leans into that and is excited by it.
How does being an artist change how you approach business?
What I've learned as an artist, what I've learned as a musician, performing musician, composer, is like we work with people, we work with other instrumentalists, we're communicating music through a page and then through these instruments that make noise. That's really helped me understand that entrepreneurship and business is people. Fundamentally, all of this is just people talking to other people about ideas and trying to get those ideas to launch to serve other people. And I've nurtured those skills over many, many years of being on stage, of many, many years of leading ensembles. And so then you like jump into the entrepreneurial landscape and you understand that if I'm giving a pitch, I'm giving it to a person. And fundamentally, I want to connect with that person in some way. And so that is kind of the seed of all of this work, is that human to human connection. Period.
At what point did you start becoming curious about technology?
I think my interest in technology and like a deep integration occurred as I was really taking those steps after my administrative work and after my work at NEC, and kind of saying, okay, I'm establishing this voice, but I'm also an artist of now. I have tools that people 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50, 200 years ago didn't have. Like, that's really cool. And how can those play into like generating new sounds, right? So this curiosity as a percussionist is like, what resonates, what makes sound, is very much aligned with my idea of like, okay, well, what tools can I use from a technology standpoint that actually elevates that? It's also this curiosity that leads to personal connections. So I don't ever feel the need to be like a master in X technology, but I want to be connected to someone who is that master. And then I can say with my artistic lens, like, okay, how can I use that? How can this be a tool in this space of performance in the public space? And it becomes this really kind of cool collaborative spirit in which like I'm hacking emerging technologies in ways that the people kind of creating some of these platforms aren't thinking about, because I'm coming in with this kind of musical, this kind of composition lens and this like curious lens.
What should aspiring creative entrepreneurs be doing to define their voice?
While I might not have like, here's step 1, 2, and 3, I can say that defining the voice is about also not defining. It's also about saying, I'm going to test this idea. It took me so long to say Maria Finkelmeyer composer. And I used all of these words to try to align that label with like who I was and what I was doing. While it did take me a long time to get there, I did get there. I have gotten to this space because I was never afraid of saying, here's who I am right now. There's a lot of fear with saying, and here's what my voice is, and here's what I'm doing, and here's what I want, and here's my idea, because you feel like that's the end and that's it. right? You feel like this is my first step is that's the step, boom. But over time, like there is time to shift and learn and to play. Giving yourself the permission to kind of say, here's what I'm doing right now without the weight of saying, and here's my lifelong artistic voice, will actually free you up to make projects. It will free you up to say, I'm just gonna do it and try and learn and fail. I failed so much. There were fundraising campaigns that were silly. There's music that's out there that I like listen to and I'm like, okay, that's not really my voice anymore. But I put it out there without fear that it was going to define me forever. Look, the internet is scary and the digital space feels like it's forever, but you will, as you grow, be able to kind of grow your voice as well. And in fact, if you kind of feel the like excitement for what you're doing right now and you do put it out there, you'll feel so much pride.